It's another episode of the Gauntlet Podcast. My name is Jason.
My name is Steve.
My name is Dan.
Great. Well, as always, we are going to get started by talking about the games we have been playing recently. Steve, I see that you were in a game of The Final Girl. Tell us about it.
So, I was playing The Final Girl in some unauthorized off-Gauntlet gaming the other night. And I was playing
There's been a lot of that recently.
A lot of that lately, yeah.
I was playing with a couple of friends I've known for a while, but who haven't done... one of them used to play D&D and Call of Cthulhu and back in the day. And the other has done very little. Aside from Fiasco, which he loves. And we were playing... The Final Girl. And then there was a third guy. This was his first role-playing experience. And he came away loving it. He wanted to do like a zombie apocalypse type of thing. So we went that route. And, nuked a city and there was some Fallout influence in there. And we had a pretty good time. It went on a bit long. I think there was perhaps a bit more alcohol than I'd advise involved. And we ended up playing far too late into the night. But Final Girl is always a hit. Great system. And... I think we need to get Brett Gillen's email address or something so we could PayPal him money or something for people who...
I've been having a lot of thoughts about The Final Girl for that very reason, because I feel like we always heap praise upon it because it's a favorite game of the Gauntlet. And so it comes up a lot whenever there's a post, about hey, what are your top 5 GM-less role-playing games? And 10 of us put The Final Girl, right? I feel like a jerk because I know they can't buy it anywhere.
Right.
So, right. Yeah.
So I don't know what the answer is, except for Brett Gillen to get over the fuck whatever his issue is right now and find a way to put it up there somehow. I don't know. Maybe he's getting ready to kickstart a new edition, in which case, that's cool. So I get behind that. But if he's just sitting on it for no reason. Yeah, what is it? I'm just very confused.
Artificial scarcity. He's going to release a premium version.
a premium PDF?
Yeah.
Is that
exactly,
what's going to do?
Yeah.
All right, cool. Awesome. Well, it looks like the next game on the list is Fiasco. I don't think our listenership needs to know much about the ins and outs of how Fiasco works.
Right, yeah.
But I do want to talk about it for a minute because this was Dan and I, as far as who played it, of the people who are here. We did the soft tilts and the soft aftermath. You want to set that up a little bit for listeners?
In a typical game of Fiasco, you reach the halfway point and you roll in what they call a tilt table, right? Which is horrible things that are going to happen that you then work into your narration for the second half. Yeah. And so there's things like something precious is on fire, which is
the best
great.
One.
Yeah, yes. That is the best one. A great plan executed stupidly and a stupid plan executed greatly, I think, are two of them, or something to that extent.
Yeah.
But just generally things to throw a wrench in the game as in the direction it's going.
Yeah.
And so the soft tilt table takes that and kind of just tones it all down a little bit, because in a game where you're using the soft tilt table, you're aiming for a game that's less about murder and mayhem, typically.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
That's the ideal. That didn't happen in my game. So,
well, I was going to ask you. So, we did 2 tables that night, and I did Fiasco High using the soft tilt table. This is their Fiasco High and Regina's Wedding are the 2 play sets that come in the Fiasco Companion book, which are meant to be used with the soft tables. And you did Regina's Wedding, right?
I did, yeah.
Yeah. So how'd it go?
It was fun in the way that crazy games of Fiasco are, but the tilt felt really underwhelming because by I don't know, the second or third scene, there was the groom was wearing ladies' clothing on the roof, and the bride was scaling a drain pipe with a switchblade in her mouth.
All right.
So it was okay, well, this is probably not really. We should probably switch to the hard tilt, but I really wanted to see the soft tilt anyway.
Right,
so the soft tilt things came into play, and they weren't super impactful in the direction the story was going, because there was already murder and the police were involved and all by the time we got to the halfway point. So all of the tilt things were something perhaps metaphorical is destroyed. And it's okay, well, we've already wrecked everything in sight by this point. So I'm not entirely sure that that's going to be a huge issue.
No one's going to be concerned about the metaphor that got destroyed.
Right, exactly.
Well, so at my table, we did Fiasco High, and we were trying to do John Hughes. John Hughes, is that right?
Yeah.
I was first going to say John Carpenter. That would have been very different. John Hughes style, high school drama. And I'm not sure how I feel about it. I think our session was not amazing, and I think it was a combination of things. I think I'm not sure it was the fault of playing Fiasco in this other mode, but I have to say that I was not loving it as much as just normal Fiasco. Like, I really like the Coen brothers, like, you know, criminals doing stupid things and everything blowing up. Like, I like that about Fiasco. And I don't really feel like, I felt like that was missing in this game that we played. But on the other hand, I also think that it was just kind of a rough night for our table. Like, I think some of the players were a little tired and not really into it. And, so I think, like, to the extent that we were able to pull off, like, this cool, like, high school drama thing, you know, like, all angsty and shit.
Right.
I don't think we were going to do it that night. So I'm just not sure. Like, I'd like to try it again, maybe, like, under different circumstances, because I know as a group we're capable of doing it. But just for whatever reason, you know, a few of us were off our games a little bit. So I don't know. Those are my thoughts on it, I guess.
So do you think it's easier to do Fiasco in the standard setting, or is that just for us?
No, I really do.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, because we do play games all the time that where it's a little bit more about just like snark and drama, right?
Right.
Like, we do that all the time. So I don't think it's us, but I do think that bangs and explosions and chaos are easier.
Yeah.
Am I the only one?
Yeah.
I mean, what do you think, Steve? I mean,
No, I think the default. I hesitate to say default Coen brothers because they do sort of have wild swings in tonality between one movie and the next. But I think the gonzo end of the Coen brothers spectrum is easier than, you know, you have to sort of thread the needle a bit when you're doing a, you know, more subdued high school drama.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that's for all role playing, not just Fiasco, right? Like, I think it's just easier in role playing games to do action. I've always thought that. So,
yeah.
But
as a bit of a counterpoint to your experience with Fiasco High, a couple years ago, I did that one with the soft tilt table, and it worked out great. There was a lot of, you know, unrequited love and
nice.
Horrible bitterness without any actual murder or death or whatever.
Right, yeah.
It worked out really well.
I mean, we didn't have any murder or death or anything. And I just think that was part of the problem. Like, I think, you know, we had put Fiasco on the calendar, and one of the players thought they were getting the traditional Fiasco experience. And so I think they weren't quite ready to play the Fiasco experience I had in mind. So that could have been a factor. I'm not sure what, you know, I think there were several things going on why our session felt kind of flat. I mean, having said all that, though, we still had a good time. We always have a good time. Like, Gauntlet falling flat is still more fun than you had. That's a joke, listeners. Just so Dan doesn't have to cut that out. That was just a joke. All right, so let's go to the next thing. So Dungeon World. Dungeon World is next on the list. That was me. I am in the room with two avowed haters of Dungeon World. So
that's not true.
Not true at all.
I just hate the type of fantasy it goes after. I respect it as a rule.
I feel like the evidence is say otherwise, but that's okay.
I feel like every time you say that and bring up Dungeon World, I say nice things about Dungeon World.
That's true. Yeah, you know,
even the problems I have with it mechanically are ultimately really minor.
Yeah. No, I'm just giving you a shit. Okay, so Dungeon World, we're doing this a special thing in the summer. We're calling it A Red and Pleasant Summer. We're using Zach Smith's OSR setting, A Red and Pleasant Land, which is basically, spoiler alert, it's Alice in Wonderland with vampires. Essentially, that's kind of reductive, but that's more or less what it is. It's a lot of fun. You know, it's a little tricky because my players who are playing with me right now, most of them have played dozens and dozens of sessions of Dungeon World with me. And so they have like certain kind of built-in expectations as far as like my Dungeon World game goes. And I think this one's defying their expectations a lot. Like, I can feel that they're having a bit of a hard time with the fact that the characters in this setting are a little absurd. They're unpredictable. The setting itself is highly unpredictable in nature. It's Wonderland, essentially, right?
Right.
Like, nothing makes sense. The physics don't make sense. There are like not very reliable outcomes in the setting, right? And so when you kind of combine that with the fact that Dungeon World can get dangerous really fast and your character can be dead like before you know it, I think that there's a bit of hesitance I'm feeling like a bit of hesitation from some of the players right now, but I think they're going to ease into it. We've got 4 more weeks, and I think by the end of the last session, people were starting to get into the groove of what I was trying to do, which was this very, very surreal and a little creepy, but also a little like funny and absurd, like kind of thing. So, but we'll see. But it's still good fun. Yeah.
Is the surreality, is it complete nonsense, or is there, you know, are there rules behind the curtain, as it were?
Well, so there are a few rules behind the curtain. One thing that my players don't realize yet, they'll know if they listen to this, is that...
Well, this will be a good test.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly. I know. One thing that Zach says in the setting is that despite how like absurd and ridiculous it all is, the characters that are native to the setting, they don't lie. like when they say something, they do mean it, you know, like, and what they, and it's not, and whatever they say they're going to do, it will do. Like they're not like inherently deceptive. Like they don't deceive, but you have to kind of like accept that with this, like, you know, their truth is also like a bit supernatural and bizarre and weird and difficult to handle, right?
Okay.
But they're fundamentally like honest, right? So that's one little kind of like aspect to the setting, which I think is interesting. So, and it's also just a little different in the sense that it's very much about like politics and like political struggle, because the setting tells the story of this like this 4-faction war that's going on, and your characters are just kind of like in the middle of it. And so that's just a little different because Dungeon World, at least my Dungeon World games, are very squarely focused on adventuring and dungeon crawling. And so,
right.
That's pretty much where the rules are.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And it's, Dungeon World holds up fine in another setting. We probably would have had more luck with like doing something like SCUP or maybe one of the, like the more dark fantasy hacks of Apocalypse World, but Dungeon World's holding up fine. It's going to be okay. So I just have to like insert a few more like fights and like mysterious locations to search than the setting implies, probably. So
how many sessions do you think you're going to get out of the Red and Pleasant Land book?
Well, that's a really great question. Per the calendar, we've got 4 more sessions, but we may have to go back to the main world at some point. I don't know. But in terms of like the setting itself, the setting material itself has got like, it could go for a long time.
Okay.
Yeah, like there's plenty of stuff there because there aren't like, it's not an adventure. It's not a module. It's just a bunch of like it's a setting. It's just a bunch of resources for your own stuff you're creating. So
cool.
Yeah, I think it could go. It's got legs. And as far as our particular game though, you know, we may not stay in this land for the entire 4 sessions to come. We may like bail out a session or 2 early, but we'll see. The next thing on the list is Cheat Your Own Adventure. I feel like this is the greatest hits of the gauntlet right now.
It really is.
It kind of is.
Final Girl,
like,
Fiasco, Cheat
Dungeon
Your Own
World, Cheat Your Own Adventure.
Dungeon
Yeah. Folks, we're getting to the new stuff soon. Trust me. Tell us about Cheat Your Own Adventure. Steve, that was you.
That was
not you.
That was
there.
Oh, were you both there?
Wait.
No.
We're not going back as far as I think we're going.
Another session of Cheat Your Own Adventure, as it turns out.
This is what happens when I'm not on every podcast.
Feel free to talk about it, though, while Dan's talking about it. Go ahead, Dan. What happened on Cheat Your Own Adventure?
I don't know that there's a lot to say about this because I think we've talked about it on every podcast, like
since we played it the first time.
2 months or 3 months. Yeah. So you tell a choose your own adventure story. I think that's all we really need to say about it. The only difference this time is that normally we play it with large groups. And this time we played it with only 3 people, which is the minimum number of people. So you have like one person doing the reading, and then you have 2 options. Like each player gives you 1 option, and it still works great. So.
That's good to know, actually. Yeah, because I was under the impression that maybe it was only for big groups. You know, like it's good to know that it has legs beyond or with a smaller group, because you often, you know, in life you have 3 people more than you have 7.
That's
right?
true.
So, yeah.
I also, what I like about it, or one thing I like about it, is that it can easily support people, you know, walking into the room and participating for 2 minutes and then walking back out.
True. Yeah. I've never thought about it, but you're right. It totally does.
Yeah. Along the lines of Jared Sorensen's Parsley adventures, like Action Castle and that sort of thing, which are perfect for that. That could be somebody walking through the room and they participate and then they're done.
Right.
Yeah, Cheat Your Own Adventure has kind of like raced up to the very top of like this very, very, very small list of games that I think are perfect for like party settings or settings where you have players who are not into role-playing games necessarily or at all. There are very few games that exist in that space for me, and Cheat Your Own Adventure has become one of them. So yeah, it's pretty cool. It's a great, like almost serendipitous find this year. So, last year, I guess, but in the last 12 months. Cool. Well, let's get to the good stuff now. Not that that wasn't good stuff before, but this is the better stuff. So one thing that I think will longtime listeners of the podcast will know that the whole purpose of the podcast is essentially, when you boil it down, just us discoursing on how much we hate Call of Cthulhu, right? I mean, that's basically it, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
If you think about it, the whole damn podcast, at its core, like fundamental elements, it's just how much we hate Call of Cthulhu. And yet we played Call of Cthulhu recently. So who wants to set it up?
Well, Steve was responsible.
Steve, you were responsible for that game. I think you get to set it up.
I would say I was partially responsible. I didn't run it, for instance. But I certainly lobbied for it. Our co-host Doyle, who's appeared on the show.
Co-host Doyle, yes.
Wanted to sort of, show us how it was done, basically, and run a Call of Cthulhu adventure for us. And it required some lobbying from Doyle and myself, and I think at least one or two other people to finally get Dan to put it on the calendar.
Did.
And so, due to heavy reluctance and inertia.
In Dan's defense.
And closed-mindedness.
In Dan's defense, I was basically throwing him under the bus on that in the background saying, just ignore it, Dan.
Right.
No one will know if you just ignore their request.
Yep.
That's why it took 5 months.
It was still a mutual decision, though. I think,
right,
it wasn't like, you know.
But it took Doyle being on the podcast and looking me in the face and being like, "When are we playing Call of Cthulhu?"
Excellent.
It's true. Oh.
So we did finally get to play, and Doyle brought to the table not just Call of Cthulhu, but Delta Green scenario.
Right.
And Delta Green is for those who don't know, it still uses Call of Cthulhu rules. But it's like a campaign framework, basically. Players are all Delta Green agents or friendlies as members of a, what do you call it? Cell-structured conspiracy, basically, within the government.
Right, yeah.
You're not quite government sanctioned. You don't have, Uncle Sam money. But you do have contacts in the government, and they usually recruit from within the government. So what I like about Delta Green, at least, as a campaign setting, it doesn't really fix anything about the Call of Cthulhu rules I have a problem with, which is most of the Call of Cthulhu rules.
We should talk about that. But yeah.
Call of Cthulhu bugs me just in theory, in that part of it is that I love, I would love for me to love Call of Cthulhu.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. But in practice, it's usually a bunch of randos gathered together for no reason, to whom crazy things are happening for no reason, speaking with a bunch of people they have no right to be speaking with, who are talking to them for no reason, and then assuming they survive and continue on, they keep doing things they have no business doing.
That was fun. Let's do that again.
Yeah. Remember when we almost died, you guys? That was great.
Well, the randos aspect is I love it because it's like a hobo, a newspaper reporter,
and a librarian,
and a socialite all got together, right? Yeah.
Right. It's like the start of a bad joke every Call of Cthulhu game.
And if people aim for the original 20s and 30s setting, like nobody knows what women were doing around then, I guess. So what was going on in the 20s? I guess I'm a flapper. Huh? That's Lovecraftian, right?
Right. Yeah.
When, of course, the correct answer is Lovecraft did not acknowledge the existence of women, and there should never be any female characters in Call of Cthulhu. Okay, so there's some problematic things with Lovecraft. But anyway.
Just a few.
Yeah. I think that's the only one. Probably. That's it.
Probably the
only
one.
Yeah. So we got to play Delta Green, which I was psyched about. Pre-gen characters, but like a long, we had an extra extended time slot for the game.
We did, yeah. Nice 6-hour block.
Yeah. And there was a nice little, sort of compact scenario that I think saw at the end, let's see, out of 6 players.
I think we all, 4 or 5 died, right? It was
3 friendlies, 3 agents, right? And I think 3 dead, 1 possessed, with the implication that at least one of the others was probably going to be murdered by the possessed.
Right, yeah.
That was fun. Very Lovecraftian there.
Well, do you have anything you want to say before I dive in, Dan? Like, what are your thoughts? I don't think we really know your thoughts on it, Dan. How do you think it went?
Well, I thought it was okay. I don't know. I thought the story was fine, and the mechanics weren't doing much for me. But yeah. Well, I did appreciate the fact that Doyle had pre-made these characters, and so the one he made for me was an IRS auditor. And by the end of the game, I was like, guys, we can just put this through the IRS system and we'll get this dude in 3 or 4 years and we can just go home. We don't have to raid this house and get murdered.
We were going to stop the cultists with the RICO statute. So
exactly. And I still maintain that was the best plan.
It probably was the best plan, actually. Here's the thing. I thought I actually had a lot of fun, and I thought that Doyle did a great job, but that's table stakes. Doyle's a good GM. So to me, that's table stakes, right? Yeah. The scenario was original. He created it. It was very good. It was a perfectly timed scenario. It lasted, exactly as long as it needed to. The thing about the rules were, here was the thing that was happening in the game that I'm just going to assume is the way you're supposed to run it, and that Doyle was doing it the way you're supposed to do it. And I suspect it is. So there were 6 of us. We'd have task X to complete. And so Doyle would ask one of us to roll. If I failed to roll, then Doyle would just ask the next person who's got a higher skill to roll, or the next highest skill to roll, right? Or he would give us he would double our skill, making it basically impossible to fail the roll, right?
Yeah, there were a number of rules like that. I don't know how.
Yeah, I noticed that happening.
I don't know if that's
and I didn't have a problem with it because I didn't want to get bogged down in classic, like, we're just sitting around and stuck because we're failed the perception check or whatever, right? Like,
Right.
I didn't want that to be. So I was kind of happy because it kept the story going. But you know what game does that already? That is both Cthulhu themed and does that exact same thing. It's Cthulhu Dark, right?
Yeah.
And Cthulhu Dark basically just mechanizes that thing that Doyle was doing, which is you basically can't fail the rolls. You just have degrees
Right.
of success, right? You always succeed for the most part. There's a little caveat there, but for the most part, you always succeed, and the story progresses forward, right? And so, I'm not saying that I am saying that's better. I think it's better because it's like a dependable codified way of doing that. Whereas I feel like Doyle was fudging it. You know, that was my feeling on it. Like, but again, I don't know. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I don't know if Doyle was fudging it or not. He was behind a screen, so he could have been doing anything.
That's true. Yeah, there were a lot of dice being rolled behind that screen.
Going on behind that screen.
Yeah.
So I guess like that's no criticism of like Doyle's jamming. Like I said, the story was great. Doyle did a terrific job. It was a lot of fun. I would not play Call of Cthulhu with anyone else. Let's just throw that out there, right? At this point, right? I just felt like the rules weren't doing much. You know, like it was fun because we were having fun with the story and we were having fun with the characters. Call of Cthulhu was doing nothing mechanically to aid that, in my opinion. And Doyle would argue that's what role-playing games are, right? They're a list of procedures meant to get you to fun. And of course, I take the opposite position, which is you should have a list of rules that work dependably, you know, so that you have like at least a base level of fun, no matter who's GMing it or running it. Right? Yeah. So those are my thoughts.
Maybe the game you're playing should have learned a lesson about game design in the last 35 years.
There's that too. And 7 editions, right? Yeah.
So one thing that I saw, first let me bitch real quick about Call of Cthulhu weapons rules. So I think the agents, I think half of us had like an actual weapon skill. And
yes, that's right.
Mine was shotgun, which is why I murdered everybody toward the end.
Right.
My IRS girl could headbutt, punch, and kick.
Right. I think that's the standard. Yeah. But I think that if I weren't using a shotgun, which again, super lethal with, if I weren't using a shotgun, I would, if I like picked up a pistol, suddenly which end's the shooting end? I'm really shit at it, even though I'm a DEA agent and presumably I've had lots of weapons training.
And it's and like in the case of a shotgun, like anybody should be able to grab a shotgun and like, but even any gun at a certain range should be manageable. I'm sorry, I'm cutting you off. So,
no. Yeah. You're just continuing with my thoughts, so that's fine. But I wanted to bring up, so there's something that sort of where the rules help encourage a style of play that I think isn't really what we're after. Like there were parts in the investigation where I was sort of my character was like, not my character, I was hemming and hawing about what if there are, what if we're walking into a trap, what if horrible thing X happens, and sort of wanting to investigate more and figure out a safer way to go about attacking our problem, right? And that's not normally what I do in a normal game. Action, jump right straight into the middle.
Yeah.
But in this game, I've got a certain number of hit points, and I think everyone that died in this scenario was one shot and they're dead.
Yeah. It was very lethal. I mean, there wasn't a lot of like danger until the very end, but once it came, it was summary,
right?
And that's SUMMARY, not SUMMERY. It was summary.
And combined with that, the setting is Delta Green, which is it's very like X-Files. There's a lot of paranoia about what else is going on in the government, and am I getting screwed from both ends here? And while I'm investigating this, is it a trap? And all that sort of thing. And all that contributes to a lot of paranoia that can sort of bog down the game. And in our case, did.
Yeah, I've got mixed feelings on that, but I'm still formulating them. Dan, what are your thoughts on that? On what Steve just said?
Well, there was a long section in the middle where we were debating what to do for what seemed like an eternity.
I do remember that part. Yeah. It was very long, and here's the funny thing. There were several moments like that like it felt like we were just doing a lot of hemming and hawing and a lot of like planning and a lot of like strategizing for how to go about. And I have to say, I kind of enjoyed it just because we don't do that every week. Like I wouldn't want to do that kind of game all the time, but I was into it this week just because it was so novel for us, like
I enjoyed it through about the halfway point, and then like it hits a point where it's like, okay, well, we're just like talking in circles now.
That's
and
true.
The story isn't going anywhere.
I mean, I like in the beginning. I felt like it was a little bit more. It kind of came through a little bit more when we were having like the characters doing the classic like debrief thing in the beginning, right? Or like not debrief, but like briefing thing. And I quite enjoyed that just because it was so forensic, right? Like it was incredibly forensic, and that's not something we ever do, right?
That's true.
And so it had a novelty to it that I was enjoying and I was appreciating, and also because it was that kind of thing. I didn't have a lot to say personally because that's not my jam really. In role playing games, I'm a lot more about like characterization and like the sort of acting aspects of it, And so this sort of thing we were doing was so different for me, and I was appreciating like kind of just watching other players do it, like it had like a sort of theater quality to it until it got a little bogged down, like you said, Dan. Yeah.
So at the halfway point you mentioned where it did bog down, that's about where I was hitting up against sort of another complaint I have, which is that we are not secret agents.
Right.
This room is not full of secret agents.
Right. Yeah.
So like I had run out of ideas of how to tackle this, but presumably my dude would have, at least been able to come up with something.
I wanted a spout lore check right then.
Right.
Yeah. I wanted something or discern realities.
Yeah. And I wasn't quite sure how to go about it because it would have been a very general roll. Can I roll to get any ideas?
Right, yeah.
Because there is an idea stat, I guess, in Call of Cthulhu. I don't know. But yeah, there's definitely a disconnect between the way I and we tend to play and how the game is set up. So
for sure, yeah.
If there were, because I enjoyed the planning too up until a point, and I don't know what the workaround is past that point.
Yeah. Well. Okay.
The workaround for us was like, okay, well, let's just go get ourselves killed, I guess.
Right.
Yeah. That's basically what we did, right? Like we were hemming and hawing over this, and I think at a certain point, I don't know if it was me or somebody else, maybe Jeff, but like we were just kind of like, let's just go fucking do this thing, let's just go get this guy. I'm sick of and we died, like we all got our asses kicked. So, maybe we didn't, and I think the problem I had with that a little bit was, it was the end of the session, is a one shot. So at the end of the day, it wasn't that big of a fucking deal, but like, part of the problem I had with it is we did spend so much time like circling around like how to go about the final confrontation. I felt like we should have come, like you said, we should have come up with something, even if like, we should like something. We should have had something,
that wasn't just like, why don't we just kick in the front door and try to shoot him?
Wait, guys, I got an idea. Get him.
And I'm not sure whose responsibility it was to give us that. Like, were we supposed to provide that, and if we hit it, then bingo, Doyle made a mark behind his screen and we would succeed, or were we supposed to do something to where Doyle would tell us? Like, I wasn't sure, because there clearly was a right answer, as it turned out. Like I thought it was just going to be like me running Dungeon World. Like there is no right answer. The answer is whatever. If you have a cool like idea, I'm going to twist the fiction a little bit to make it occur, right? Or to make you look cool, right?
And basically, the right answer was one character had to look into a thing he didn't look into.
Right, yeah. There wasn't, like, there was a right answer. Yeah. Like, there was a solution. And that's a very, very old way. That's a very, very old school style of gaming that I'm not accustomed to. I
had even figured out what was going on in the scenario and couldn't come up with a way to get that knowledge from my head to my charher's head at all.
Right.
Because,
There was a lot of meta knowledge going on at the table.
There was a lot of knowing looks going around.
Right. But we couldn't figure out what to do with it.
Right.
Right, yeah. Well, okay, so Call of Cthulhu, Delta Green. I had a lot of fun. I am glad I got to play Call of Cthulhu. It's been a few years, to be honest. It's been a little while. But I also feel validated because my opinions of Call of Cthulhu weren't altered at all. I feel really solid in my opinion on Call of Cthulhu as far as the rules go.
I've never not had fun with Call of Cthulhu, and I've never not been disappointed.
That's kind of sad in a way. Yeah, it's kind of tragic.
It's almost a story of role-playing games, though, right? I mean, like, I've played tons of shitty trad games where I still have fun, like, I'm still at the table enjoying myself, but, like, we're trying to reach some we're trying to get to some kernel of more like essential truth about role-playing games on this podcast, I think. Than just,
Are we?
Than just fun.
Are we?
Yes.
Okay. It's good to know. I'll make a note of that.
Make a note of that. No, but again, I also think, Doyle's opinion was, on these things was validated as well, which is he is of the opinion, and not just him, this is a particular feeling in a certain segment of role-playing games, a large segment, that the rules are just there to be like, kind of used as needed, right? Like they either are helpful or they're not helpful, but they're just kind of a list of procedures for you to like basically improvise and make it as fun as you can with your GMing skill or whatever. So, Call of Cthulhu, Delta Green. Let's see. The very next thing on the list is Grant Howitt's Regency Ladies. I'm going to go out on a limb here, Dan. Just tell me if you think I'm right here. I think we are the only humans on Earth who have played Regency Ladies. Thoughts?
I think that's not true.
Okay,
Either that
why?
or Grant Howitt is fabricating messages from other people to him talking about how they play tested Regency Ladies and it was fun. So.
Well, Grant's never played it though.
That is documented.
That's straight from the horse's mouth. Okay, fair enough. Regency Ladies, why don't you set it up?
Okay, so it is during the Regency period, which I just learned was when exactly?
Oh shit!
Sounds like you didn't just learn.
That. Like 1810 to something.
Early 19th century. So much earlier than any of us actually thought.
Yeah,
we looked it up
thought
and
it was
we're
much later.
shocked.
Yeah, we're like, whoa.
We are terrible students of history. But
it's Jane Austen novels.
Exactly.
Right, yeah.
It originally started as a hack of Goblin Quest, which is the game where you have 5 characters who die one after another and the next one steps up. And so it was originally conceived as a hack of that, and it came out of the Kickstarter for that game. But at some point, apparently, Grant Howitt decided that he could not actually make that work and just wrote a new game. So it's just stuck in the tail end of the Goblin Quest book. It's like, here's this other game. So we didn't even know, like we were still expecting like a Goblin Quest thing when we put it on the calendar and then realized, oh wait, no, this is something completely different. But in this one, now the way it works is every player has 2 characters and you have a man and a woman and you roll their stats initially for their charm, their means, and their standing, which is charm is kind of self-explanatory, means just how rich they are, and their standing and like how important their name is, right? Like their place in society. Because you can be from a super old family, very well respected, but be dirt poor.
Yeah.
And in that case, you're still not very desirable. So you roll your stats for those 3 things and you're rolling like a D6 and you write down whatever you roll for your female character, and then your male character gets the inverse of that. So you can end up having like one character who's very charming, wealthy, and it comes from excellent stock, and your other character is just a complete degenerate, right? Or you can end up a little more balanced. But the goal of the game is it takes place over 2 years, and you're going to social functions throughout each year, and you're forming relationships with other characters, and by the end of the game, you want your characters married to desirable characters that other people own.
And there's an objective measure for desirability.
There is, yes. So ideally, you want all 3 traits to be high on your partner, but failing that, you can go ahead and get rid of charm, because that doesn't really matter as much as the others. And if you can only pick one, you should definitely pick means. So... Right. Which it turns out that is not entirely what we did.
No,
because if you're a complete degenerate, even if you are incredibly wealthy, like, I don't know, I just couldn't.
When you say degenerate, do you mean like social degenerate?
Social degenerate,
okay,
yeah.
Right, yeah.
I just couldn't bring myself to make my characters want to marry like the freakish, like no charm loser who just had a lot of money.
Yeah.
That's neither here nor there. So what'd you think about it?
I liked it a lot. So I'll caveat that by saying it's got classic Grant Howitt fiddliness, right? Like he's got like he sometimes like adds one too many rules, right? Like you just need to take one out, and that was the same case here too. Like otherwise perfect games with like one too many rules. This one had like one little tiny rule feature which was completely disposable. But setting that aside, I liked it a lot. It was really, really fun. this cat's really good at conceptualizing, like, here's a story I want to tell, and here are the rules that are going to, like, make this weird story happen, right? Like, look at, like, Warrior Poet, right? Or the opening sequence of One Last Job, right? Like, that's a very, very specific fictional thing, and he's like, and he had a terrific little little mechanic to make that happen. I liked it a lot. My favorite feature of the game, which was a surprise actually, was there's a competitive aspect during the, like, little social functions during the seasons. It's highly, highly competitive. Like, you are in the fiction and also, like, kind of at the table a little bit too. You want your character you want to be with that guy because he's got he's a noble and he's got money, right? And this guy over here, doesn't have quite as much money, and he's otherwise probably a decent catch, but you know what? I'm angling for this other guy because he's clearly better. And
objectively
he's
better.
Objectively better, right? And so that comes out terrifically in both the mechanics and the fiction. Like, it just comes across really well. Like, this idea of, I am really angling to get that guy, right? And the mechanics support it. The mechanics support you being able to, like, play hyper competitively like that within this, like, framework of genteel, British people,
and it is, like, because they're basically objectively graded as far as their desirability, it's like everyone at the table is angling for the same person.
Right.
So, like, in some cases, you will have the most desirable character, and then everyone's attention is on you, and everyone is, like, trying to get with you, right? But then in other cases,
but of those three, there's one that's clearly better for you, right?
Yeah.
And so you have to kind of, like, you're also, like, defending yourself from the less desirable, attention, Yeah.
And so charm is kind of meaningless as far as their desirability as a actual marriage partner, but it's really powerful in, like, forming bonds, because you have to, like, mechanically match dice with other players to form bonds.
Right.
And your charm determines how many dice you actually have at your disposal. So, like, if a character has a lot of charm, they're going to be matching with a ton of other people. And so their relationships grow really quickly. But if they don't also have other stuff going for them,
nobody's
then,
gonna
like,
want it, right?
Yeah, they're like the plague, right? Like, you're trying to unmatch with them as much as possible. So
very charming, but you're a poor, and I can't marry you.
Yes.
Yeah. It was great. I loved it. I was very, very surprised by how much I enjoyed it. I don't think I had, like, low expectations or anything, but I think there was a part of me that was a little bummed about it not being a Goblin Quest hack, I think.
Yeah.
And because I was really looking forward to, like, translating Goblin Quest over to that setting, but I think it was great. Yeah.
It does a really good job of satisfying my desire to be a snarky English person, like the snarky English person that I've always wanted to be.
That you were born to be.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's living inside of you.
Exactly. Yeah. And just letting it out. It's great. The one thing that I think, like, looking back on it, I think we were playing to the idea that, like, oh, we don't want to match with this poor person who is just charming. Yeah. But, like, mechanically, it doesn't necessarily matter, because at the end of the day, there's nothing that forces you to propose to certain people.
That's true. Yeah.
And you can always reject any marriage proposal.
Yeah.
So you kind of, like, find someone and settle at the end.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, I think it would be more interesting in a lot of cases to make it mandatory.
Like, you must propose to them. Yeah.
If you have grown so fond of this person that, like, your heart just takes over and you propose to them, no matter the fact that it's completely socially disastrous, right? So
that'd be a good touch, I think. Yeah.
I kind of wanted that. I felt like at the end, because we had, like, the super charming poor person who nobody wanted, but who everyone was super into, like, as far as the marks on the sheet went, everybody was super into her, but nobody would, like, pop the question, right?
But see, I kind of like it though. Like, to me, I liked that aspect of our characters are clearly into this person. They're charming and pretty or sexy or whatever, right? Our characters are clearly into her. And under different circumstances, we would pop the question, right? But we're not going to pop the question because she's broke, right? like to me, that's like the game. Like, I like that.
Yeah, but it kind of takes the teeth out of the mechanics.
For sure. No, I agree. Some sort of, like, more, like, hard and fast, like, mandatory thing would be good. But, having said that, without that, I think we came to some really good conclusions. Like, Kristen, who was playing with us, she was delighted when your captain of the army character or whatever proposed to that that poor charming character. Like she was very delighted by that. Like it was like the fairy tale come true, you know, and like and I don't know.
Well,
and,
she was mostly just relieved that my poor ass dude wasn't proposing to her actually desirable character.
Yeah, I know.
But
well, there was that too part of it also. I liked it. I liked a lot of the feelings that I had while playing that game, and I think
it worked really well.
Yeah, it did. It was great, except for this one little like interim mechanic, like phase thing you do between the seasons. But
even that, like, I don't even care about that. One other thing that's super cool is at the beginning of every scene, you roll and one person gets control of the scene, and you can bid your standing, which will like put you at a little slight disadvantage later, but you can bid standing to be the person who controls the scene. And so that person, like, everyone has picked which character they're going to play. Like, you know, I'm going to play my dude. I'm going to play my girl. That person who gets control of the scene can make one person flip and be like, no, actually, you're going to play your dude. Yeah. Cause they're like futzing with the invitations, right? And like, oh, your dude gets the invitation.
But it's a push your luck thing, because you have to bid standing to make sure you secure that power. And if you do that, you can't defend yourself during the season, because standing is what you use to like essentially defend your character from having an undesirable person.
You defend yourself from being manipulated, essentially.
Yeah,
if you're standing.
Yeah. It was a great game. I liked it a lot. Yeah. I had a problem with this one little tiny rule, but other than that, it was sharp and good. Awesome. Well, that just leaves, if I'm not mistaken, Chuck Eat Cheese. Listeners, you may have never heard of this because it's not something you can buy. It's probably not even a real game.
It's like the Final Girl.
yeah, exactly.
It's just a game we talk about that no one can find on the internet. Yeah.
Chuck Eat Cheese. That's not Chuck E. Cheese. It's Chuck Eat, E-A-T. Chuck Eat Cheese is my hack of Dog Eat Dog. Dog Eat Dog is a game about colonization. One player plays like an occupational force, like a colonizing force, and the rest of the players play the natives of this island. And the whole point of the game is that you have this power imbalance between the occupation and the natives, and eventually some of the natives will rebel and be killed, but they might also like win some freedom for the island. I think that was a good 30-second summary of what Dog Eat Dog is about. Yeah. Chuck Eat Cheese is my hack of that, which takes place in a pizza fun arcade. And the two factions are the cast members, who are the employees of the restaurant, and corporate. Now, the setup is...
So does everyone know what a pizza fun factory is?
Well, like a Chuck E. Cheese's,
right.
A Peter Piper. Really, the one that, as I've characterized it, Chuck E. Cheese's is the only thing that's still around that kind of is close to that, right? They've, like, over the years, they've had different things, but I'm talking about the ones that have, like, characters, you know? Like
Showbiz, I think, was the one.
That's Chuck E. Cheese's now. Chuck E. Cheese bought them ages ago.
Oh, really?
Actually, Showbiz bought Chuck E. Cheese's, but they changed everything to Chuck E. Cheese's.
Well, that makes sense, because that hillbilly bear was not really doing it.
So anyway, the setup of the game is that your characters are employees of a franchise of your particular pizza arcade chain. They're a franchise who's resisted being purchased by corporate for over 20 years. And so as a result, there's a lot of like odd things about your store that doesn't match all of the other stores of that type in the chain. And so, like, you're the last like holdout franchise. But eventually at the start of the game, the franchise has been purchased and now corporate is moving in and changing things up, right? Like they're changing things, and your characters are ostensibly resisting the changes, or they don't resist them and they become part of the corporate structure. I've also added in like a sort of a layer of like surrealism to it. Some of the odd things that happen in your restaurant, like the things that define your restaurant, are like these, what I call peculiarities. They're little strange things that make your store very unique. And I encourage players to make those like really bizarre things that are perfectly reasonable to take place in this restaurant, right? In this world. Like there are things that happen, but like no one like seems like bothered by it or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, we almost had a bit of magical realism in our Chuck E. Cheese game.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going for. Yeah. I mean, that was definitely what I was going for. I mean, so in our game, we had like a ball pit that constantly needed to be refilled. Like, so like every week they got like ball shipments to put in the ball pit, because it was essentially, there was some like kind of interdimensional vortex like sucking the balls down and
spitting back up artifacts from past ages
like Civil War plates and arrowheads and shit. Little stuff like that. So anyway, was that a good setup for the game? I don't know.
I think so.
Okay. So anyway, I was going for a certain like sort of feel, and I think it went pretty well. What'd you guys think?
So I enjoyed it a lot. but I'm coming from a place of not having played actual dog eat
dog, yeah.
And we ended up having no cast members at the end of the game who had done the dog eat dog equivalent of dog
right,
run
and
amok,
that was a big mistake on my part. So normally in Dog Eat Dog, we've only played it once, but in Dog Eat Dog, we did have at least like two, I think.
Yeah. I played it a couple times, and both
really?
times, we've had a couple people go run
Yeah,
amok.
I've only played it once, and when we played, we had like 2 of the 6 people run amok or whatever. But I think one of the things that I should have done differently in the game, or emphasized when we played, was the peculiarities of your restaurant that you define beforehand. These are supposed to be things that, because of like just tradition or like affection, your cast members don't want to see changed by corporate. And I didn't really stress that properly.
Yeah,
when we were
a few of the things that ended up on our list were
things that people were happy to see go.
Right, yeah.
And so
while they added character, it was like,
yeah. So like that part of it didn't come quite through the way I would have liked. Like this idea of the cast members like fighting for the integrity of their store, that they're so loyal to.
Yeah, there's very little reason for some of the characters not to just be like, okay, well, yeah, a lot of shit should change. I'm totally fine with corporate.
Right.
corporate's looking into this problem. Thank God.
Yeah, seriously. I've been like sending letters to OSHA for months.
I think maybe like that needs to be kind of emphasized either at the table or in the rules themselves. But I think like with that change, it would probably be fine. Because I still enjoyed the story we told quite a bit, even though we didn't have anybody go run amok. But I was happy with it, and I think as a GM, I could have probably done a better job. Dog Eat Dog is tricky to GM. I've GM'd it one other time. The other time I played, it's tricky to GM because you've got to really, really like stick it to the players, right? Like in a way that like they fundamentally don't want their character to acquiesce to what the occupation or corporate wants them to do, And so in Dog Eat Dog, I think it's a little easier because we're dealing with like higher stakes things, like I can have my occupation forces line your whole family up against a wall, ready to shoot them. That's something that your character is going to fight back against, right? Like you're going to fight back against that. You don't need much prompting from me. It was
stakes
a little
not quite as high.
Yeah, and the stakes aren't as high in Chuck E. Cheese, and so I tried to accomplish that by a couple different ways. But we had some suggestions that came up of ways of like really hammering that home. And one of the ones that you said, Dan, I think was, what was it, like something where like
in character creation, add an additional thing that your character can't lose or really cares about, something for you to go after.
I think it was something like you want something that some reason that your character, because we had like one of the things was there's a reason that your character has to keep this job, right? And then one of the things that I suggested adding was, what are you afraid that you'll lose if you keep working here forever, right? You have some interest outside of the store.
Right, exactly.
That the corporate player can actually hit.
And I think that was it. Like, I think I didn't understand all of the characters enough, like as characters. And that's okay in Dog Eat Dog because it's really the occupation versus like a culture. Not really like versus an individual character. Whereas in Chuck Eat Cheese, I think it's going to be paramount for the characters to be a little bit more fleshed out. Because where I had some success, like pushing the buttons the right way, was with Dan's character, who was a punk rocker, right? And I kind of like, Dan was doing a good job of like towing the corporate line, but then I kind of stepped in and said, hey, we'd like for you to take on more responsibilities, like maybe move up in management. That's going to require you to quit your punk rock band, And Dan didn't want to do it, or his character didn't want to do it. And so he resisted that, right? It got the response that I wanted, And so, I think I was starting to kind of hit my groove a little bit with that. But by the time it happened, it was kind of like too late for the game, I guess. But all in all, I was pretty happy with it. I think the biggest gamble I made was creating that sort of surreal aspect to it, and I'm happy that didn't come off wrong to me. I thought it came off okay.
Yeah, I was skeptical going in, but
I was skeptical when I wrote it, but I wanted a certain thing, because here's the thing, listeners. I've worked at a Chuck E. Cheese. I've spent like probably 2 or 3 years total at working at Chuck E. Cheese's in my youth, and that is an incredibly bizarre experience. It's an inherently bizarre experience. There's so many weird things about it, and I think that's why that game Five Nights at Freddy's is so popular, right? Because they're tapping into the same thing in that game, which is this is a weird environment, right?
Oh, sure.
Like it's a really weird environment. It's a very strange, atypical environment, and I wanted to kind of express that, like kind of in a magical realism way, or in a sort of David Lynchian, but like goofy, way. That was what I was going for.
Yeah.
So I was
I
happy with
think the reason it worked is that our characters treated it as if it were normal.
Exactly. Yeah. Like the characters, it was just a thing. It was like, okay. And corporate did too. Corporate was like, well, we can't have that. Like, like it was, like it was, yeah, because we had several things that were like that, that were kind of like oddball. But anyway, yeah, I was into it. If listeners are interested, they can go onto Google Plus and scroll around for a while and find my link. So, well, let's just move on to the next segment then. So our next segment is Giving Me Life. This is where we talk about things that are not necessarily related to role-playing games. Dan, why don't you start giving me life?
Sure, yeah. What's giving me life this week is actually, this kind of goes back a ways. So, like, have you ever had one of those nights where, like, maybe you've been drinking or something and it's like 2 a.m. and your significant other is asleep. You're just alone in your living room in a dark room and you just start exploring the strange nooks and crannies of like,
oh God, where's this going?
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Like,
I know that sounded really sexy.
It did. Yeah. I'm going to try to dial that back. Yeah.
So you just start exploring all of the strange apps that are available that you never go into. The ones that are like,
when you say apps, what do you mean by that?
Like applications on your TV, on your television set.
Do televisions have applications as well?
Smart TVs do. Technically, I was on a Chromecast, but I didn't want to have to get involved
sorry,
in that.
I think you could say channel. You could have said channels.
But it's not really a channel because it's more obscure than that. It's not it's not like you're just up at the high channels of your
satellite or whatever.
Box,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Like these are designed specifically to deliver this super niche content
Okay.
You would never go and like just check out like, hey, this is completely on my radar. I'm going to go see what's new in the world of Korean dramas. So, but anyway, sometimes you have those nights where it's like, you just don't feel like doing anything and you're just like sitting on the couch and you're like, well, what the hell? I'll just check out some Korean dramas. So in the midst of exploring this like weird nether regions of my Chromecast, I stumbled across this thing and it is Korean music videos that are dramatized to like outrageous degrees. So we're talking about like K-pop songs that are like cut up and mixed into like 20-minute videos of actual like videos that try to tell stories and stuff. So it's like a post-apocalyptic thing and there's like two ladies who are sisters, maybe lesbians, I don't know, because I don't speak Korean, so it's hard to get the subtext.
So it's not subtitled?
No.
But Dan was filling in the gaps in his brain.
I was just imagining.
So, yeah.
I was probably sick. This seems like something I would do in a fever dream, and like I only sort of remembered it the next day. I was like, was I like at 4 a.m. was I watching strange Korean music videos? And then I just put it out in my mind for a while.
Dream?
Right.
Yeah.
Because let's just say one thing. That's pretty fucking weird. It's not just one 20-minute video because they took multiple songs and strung them together so that they all tell the story throughout multiple videos. So we're talking about like a 40-minute epic about post-apocalyptic sword fighting.
Okay.
Set to K-pop. So.
Okay.
Right. So kind of amazing. I actually ran across it again. So I was finally like, I need to settle this. Was this something I imagined or does this actually exist? So through some extensive Googling, I discovered that it is a South Korean pop band named Tiara. That's T-A-R-A.
Yes.
And they're like this idol group or whatever. There's like, I don't know, there's like 25 of them or something because they are manufactured by a company. I don't know, like they are manufactured by a media company. Like I think they rotate in and out or something, but they make these amazing videos. And there's one that's like a cop drama and it starts with like this little girl's father getting gunned down in like a mob hit. And then she becomes a bounty hunter or something. And like, but she's working with the guy who shot her father and there's inevitable betrayals and all of this, but like, mixed in with like, I think the song is called like Lovey Dovey or something. So that's just going on in the background.
I love it.
Because there's little snatches of English that they like pepper in, right? Because that sounds cool, I guess. And so like during these gunfights, there's just things like, oh, baby, I'm a cry. So it's amazing. These things are fantastic. There's a couple of them. I don't know. You can find them. Just Google Tiara drama music video and you'll find them. They're such a big deal, apparently, that they released them on DVD in other regions. So I watched a Japanese unboxing of like this Tiara music video DVD. And so then they're compelled to make special features. So there are some of these songs that have like 3 different music videos because one of them is like just a standard, we're all on stage doing a choreographed dance thing. Whatever. I don't know. I've never actually made it through an entire one of theirs because I turned that on. And I'm like, okay, this is boring. There's no gunfights or like sword fights. Sword fights with a blind swordswoman in a bumpin' discotheque. So I'm not interested. But the third video for one of these songs is the zombie version where they're doing their choreographed dance. But at some point, someone in the crowd becomes a zombie and starts eating the other members of the audience. And then, like, they are completely unfazed. They're doing their dance, but, like, all around them, shit is going crazy. And, like, guards are pulling down barricades to, like, erect, like, makeshift cages to keep these zombies out. And, like, guards are getting eaten and stuff all around them.
At least they came prepared.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I assume, like, that's all I know about South Korean concerts. I guess that's just standard practice is like zombie guards that you can pull down at a moment's notice.
And again, none of this is subtitled and you have no idea what they're saying unless it's periodically in English.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just checking.
So I just assume, but I mean, on the zombie one, it's pretty obvious what's happening.
Right.
I think at the end, one of the members of the band might be a zombie. I wasn't entirely clear on that, but they zoomed in really tight on her eyes and they looked kind of weird.
The Thriller
so
thing.
Like,
the Michael
I guess
Jackson
she's probably
Thriller
a zombie
thing
or something.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Awesome. Well, my giving me life is synth wave music. That is what's giving me life, really, for the last few weeks, honestly. So synth wave music is this. It's also sometimes called retro electro, I think. And I think it's also called Outrun. I'm not sure what that's a reference to. Maybe the video game.
The video game?
Yeah, possibly. I don't know. But the idea is this is music that sounds like the scores to 1980s science fiction and fantasy films.
Ooh.
You know, like it's real.
I'm listening.
Yeah, it's really, it's real. It's very, very synthy, but it's, I guess it's essentially like electronica, but it's not like, but it's got this really, really like retro vibe to it. And so, like you think of like 1980s horror movies and like the strange music that plays like while the killer is like hunting down the people or whatever, or like during the credits. It's that kind of stuff. I don't know how to really like, you know, verbalize what it's like, except to say it just sounds like 1980s genre soundtracks. So pretty awesome. There's no like lyrics or anything. It's all just like, you know, instrumental or synth. 3 bands to check out. If anybody who wants to go check out Synthwave, there's several terrific Spotify playlists, but on those playlists you will find a group called Laserhawk, or a guy called Laserhawk. He's really good. Night Satan is very good. And then Rolly Mingwald is really great as well. So
it's Laserhawk with a Z, by the way.
It is Laserhawk with a Z. Yeah, Laserhawk, Night Satan, and Rolly Mingwald. Go find them; they're awesome. There's a bunch of bands. They're not bands. I see bands. It's not. It's just a guy. I'm sure it's just one guy.
I'm sure.
Yeah. But they're pretty cool. So synthwave, I'm living for it. It's kind of exactly what I want in music in a lot of ways. So and also I am making for my Carcosa campaign coming up, I'm making a sort of like companion Spotify playlist made up of synthwave music because it's like that music is exactly what I hear in my head when I'm thinking about Carcosa. So yeah, synthwave.
Let me ask you a question.
Sure.
I'm going to ask you the question that you asked to every OSR person that you've ever met.
Okay.
If this is just old music, if this just sounds like old music, why don't you just listen to the old music?
Well, there's a really great answer for it, though. Where the fuck do you find that? Like, that's right.
I guess that's the exact same answer they give, right?
No, well, that's what they used to give. They don't have the excuse anymore, though, because old D&D is now freely available. But I think that's not a good excuse anymore. Sorry. No. I mean, I'm not. You know, I wouldn't even know where to begin. Like, where do you find that music? I don't know. I have no idea. Synthwave, though, it's freely available on Spotify. So that's mine. Steve?
So this week, what's giving me life is my second love, aside from gaming, namely bad movies. And for years, I would get together every week with similarly inclined friends of mine, and we would have a bad movie night. But that was in Austin. I am stuck in the suburbs. And I haven't done that in a while. So I recently, sort of via a website that has a lot of lesser known, fun, bad movie rarities, rediscovered this and have been watching and downloading for future fun watching some really, really genuinely terrible things. And this ties in nicely with sort of, I've coincidentally been coming up against a couple of other, bad movie things. First of those is the podcast, The Flophouse. They're big enough they don't need a signal boost from me, but it's Elliot Kalin, who until recently was the head writer for The Daily Show, and a couple of other guys. One of whom apparently, like, they barely mention it, but I think he used to like run a gaming store or something, because they mentioned like going to where he works and there's all these minis and comics, and I'm like, oh, okay, bonus points. But in fairness, they mostly watch like big budget theatrical releases, which usually means they're not watching movies anyone else should ever watch, but they're funny, so they properly make fun of them.
Like Transformers and stuff like that.
Yes,
right? Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And only everyone, not every movie can be The Happening or, The Wicker Man.
Yeah.
I also recently went to I think the fourth time I've seen The Room in an actual theater. The Room is, bar none, the best bad movie experience. It's not the worst movie. It's terrible. It's not the worst movie, but it's the most enjoyably bad.
But yeah.
Well, you're wrong, and that's okay.
I think Troll 2 is probably...
Troll 2's up there, don't get me wrong. But there's not as wide a gulf between director's intention and actual result on Troll 2.
That's fair, yeah.
But anyway, seeing it in the theater usually means you're seeing it with a bunch of people that have seen The Room 1,000 times before. It was like a midnight showing. It's, at a theater where they also do Rocky Horror type showings. And it's not quite to that level. People don't always dress up, but there's, occasional Room cosplay I've seen, that sort of thing.
Interesting, yeah.
And people bring spoons and throw them at the screen for reasons that you probably wouldn't get unless you've, seen a theater show.
Right, yeah.
But I've also finally watched a couple of movies that I've been meaning to watch for a long time, and they exceeded expectations even. First is Vampire's Kiss, which is late 80s.
I've seen that.
Nicolas Cage.
Yeah.
And Nicolas Cage he's not every movie of his is terrible. But when it is terrible, his tendency to overact blooms into a bright, beautiful, shining flower.
That's true.
And Vampire's Kiss, holy crap, that movie is cagey as all get out. The spoiler, nobody should really watch the movie unless it's for bad movie purposes anyway. But spoiler, he gets attacked by a bat and is basically an asshole degenerating into a crazy asshole, and just sort of thinks he's becoming a vampire while he's just going crazier and crazier.
Okay, yeah.
And all of this is just an excuse for Nicolas Cage to mug for the camera and aggressively overact and intimidate film critics of the time. And yeah, it's real great. It's up there with like The Wicker Man and Zandalee and Deadfall. If nobody should have seen either of those last two ever, unless you're watching bad movies, but they're great.
Dan and I are just nodding our heads,
right?
Like, steadily nodding our heads.
I'm just so confused by this whole thing.
Right. I need to sit you down, strap you in. I won't have to strap you in. Show you the room. I've now encountered 2 people who don't quite get the room, but that's out of 50 or something. So you'd enjoy it.
I just don't understand. I don't know.
That's fair. It's not for everybody. I mean, the room is. But bad movies in general, not for everybody. And I also managed to watch, oh my God, Samurai Cop.
Yeah.
Let me just sit here for a second. Samurai Cop stars has in it the recently deceased, may he rest in peace, Robert Zadar, who Mystery Science Theater lovers might know from Soul Taker or Future War as the man who is 30% jaw.
Of course.
Yeah. You wouldn't know him from anywhere else.
That guy.
Unless you're a big fan of Pocket Ninjas. Have you guys seen Pocket Ninjas? No? Okay.
Last night, yeah.
Was that the original or the remake?
Oh, the original, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I'm a bigger fan of the remake of Pocket Ninjas. Yeah.
So Robert Zadar had a disease called, I think, cherubism, which led to an ever-expanding jaw as his... Oh, wait, I'm sorry. He was in Tango and Cash as Face.
Wow, that sounds really insensitive based off the illness you've just described.
It wasn't quite as egregious in the late 80s when that was filmed, but Samurai Cop has him as the main bad guy, and then a couple of nobodies as the Samurai Cop, and and the inevitable black guy partner. But Samurai Cop is a perfect storm of incapability and incompetence, and people, making a movie that have no business doing anything movie related. And it's difficult to describe, especially because one of the scenes is very visual. It's the samurai cop dude and a nurse who's supposed to be a hot nurse making single entendres. Yeah. And then occasionally cutting
Those
to
just entendres.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah.
And then occasionally cutting to hilarious reaction shots from the guy's partner. And it's clearly that the director was just like, okay, we need like 5 seconds of you reacting. And guy does not know how to handle that. And so I can't convey this across the podcast, but there's a lot of just, pursed lips. Ooh. And where he can't even like hold the facial position. The muscles are rebelling. And yeah, good solid stuff. But yeah, the bad movies are what's giving me life at the moment.
So our next segment is called Steal This Game Mechanic. In this one, the way we've conceived it, and actually, Steve, it was kind of your conception, so I might toss it over to you, but the way I understand it is sometimes when we're playing games, this happens to us a lot, we think, oh, this little mechanic would be great in some other game, or you could take this and do it in any game, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, I think you described it as like small portable game mechanics that can be used to deepen the experience of other games. Is that a good?
Yeah. It's stuff that's not too intrinsic to the rest of the game. Like, it's not tied mechanically too much to the rest of the game. Like, we're not lifting bits from Burning Wheel or whatever.
Oh, but right. Yes. Yeah. Never steal those game mechanics. All right. The Burning Wheel mechanics. No, so for sure. So we've decided on, or well, really, Steve, what is the game mechanic? Which game and the game mechanic have you decided that we could steal for other games?
So the one that really brought this to mind was Questlandia.
Yeah.
By, what's her name? Let me see. Hannah Schaffer.
Hannah Schaffer, yeah.
Maybe Schaffer. I'm not sure. Schaffer is what I'm going with. And I know the mechanic was inspired by Joshua Newman's Human Contact, but I haven't played that. So maybe you guys could, have you guys played this?
I have not played.
No,
I have not.
So you cannot chime in. In Questlandia, everybody starts off the game by jointly creating a setting. And part of that, and what contributes to your setting's, unique atmosphere, is that you jointly create not quite a whole language, but it makes it sound like you have your own language. So basically, and I could be getting this a little bit off, but this is at least approximate. So I think we had 3 players in our game. And I think, Dan, you were in that game, weren't you? Yeah. So we had 3 players in our game. And I believe each of us contributed 3 monosyllabic sounds.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like
phonemes, essentially.
Right. And like, I remember there was some, Arabic influence. So like all was one of the sounds. And you write them all
like
on
AL.
Yeah. So you write them all on index cards, put them in the center. And there were 3 of us, 3 each. We had 9. And from those, you basically create your character's name using however many syllables it seems appropriate. And then every time you have to name something else from then on, you write another syllable down on a card, throw it in the center, and then you gradually expand the sort of language pool from there on out. But it's basically a very easy, very simple way to be on the same page when it comes to what to name things,
Right.
And this would work great for a fantasy.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. I've never actually played Questlandia, so I don't know the game well, but I understand the mechanic as you've described it. And as you've described it, I love it. And here's the reason why. Because I have a big problem with names in games that don't match each other, or they seem like out of place with each other. Like, why would you be called that and you're called that? It makes no sense. Like, we're from the same tribe or whatever, you know, like,
right.
And so to the extent that like a mechanic like that, especially in a fantasy game, would help create realism or consistency in the sort of like little fantasy culture you've made, I love that. I think that's terrific. Yeah.
And you could probably easily, maybe if you didn't quite take up so much space with like note cards, maybe if you just kept a list, right? Then you could probably do different cultures. Phonemes, and make things again very easily sound distinct.
Yeah. I love that. I think it's a terrific idea. Cool, awesome. Well, that was a great little short, tiny segment. I loved it.
Well, let me give you the one pitfall for this, and that is if someone decides that there's a Klingon word that I don't know how to actually pronounce it, but it looks like cock. And they put that
strictly
into the
hypothetically
mix.
speaking.
Yeah, hypothetically, if that happened, expect everything to be named with variations of cock.
I believe we had a character. I believe we had a character named I'll Get Cock.
Oh no! Oh, gamers.
Yeah.
Were these us? These are our players who did this?
Yeah.
It was Dan, me, and one other person, yes.
Wow.
I've played Questlandia multiple times there. That only happened the one time that somebody put cock in the middle of the table.
We should talk about Questlandia sometime. I've never played it. I really want to. It looks pretty interesting. But,
I want to replay it. It was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Let's go to the next segment. So our next segment is called Create a Role Player. So here's the idea behind Create a Role Player. We get asked quite a bit by our members and by people in the community, and especially now so because of the podcast. I have been asked personally a number of times something along these lines. Hey, I've got this friend who I'm going to be hanging out with in such and such, but they're not really into games. Do you have like a role-playing game you'd recommend for them? You know?
And then you say Final Girl.
Yeah, then I just say the Final Girl and the conversation's over. Thank you, Dan. That's actually true. But no, we get asked this a lot. Like, like our opinions on like, hey, I'm trying to get my family into games, or I'm trying to get these friends at work into role-playing games. Like, what would you suggest? And so this new segment, Create a Role Player, we may not do it every week, but I think we're going to do it this week. Actually, I know we're going to do it this week because we're doing it right now.
I sure hope so. Otherwise, this is a lot of wasted verbiage.
I'm just introducing the segment. We're going to do it next time.
Yeah. Maybe.
Maybe. Yeah. So I think the way this is going to progress is whenever we do this segment, we're going to say the type of person whom we would like to create a role player out of, and what games each of us would recommend, or what, like what we would recommend to get that person into role-playing games. So what we've decided for our inaugural, is that the right word?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Our inaugural Create a Role Player segment is the Star Wars nerd. Everyone knows this person. They're a nerd. They're a Star Wars nerd, but it's kind of like the only way they're a nerd. They're not really like into other things. They're just really super into Star Wars, but they've never played role-playing games. And so, how do you get the Star Wars nerd into role-playing games? I'm going to throw out there that I think there's probably an easy answer here in like one of the several licensed Star Wars role-playing game products, all of which are shit. All of which are just hot, nasty ass garbage, all of them. So you could do that, but I would like to suggest that there are better choices for
if you want them to actually enjoy role playing.
Yeah, if you want them to actually continue with the hobby.
Right.
Although to be fair, David started with that Star Wars game. Yeah, and he's now, so I'm wrong. I'm not always right, I should say. Not everything is universal in the way I would like it to be sometimes. So we're each going to suggest a thing for our Star Wars nerd friend. By the way, I don't have such friends. Just want to throw that out there. I'm not a Star Wars nerd myself, and I don't even know any Star Wars nerds who I want to create a role player out of, but I think a lot of other people do, so let's do it.
Yeah, I've watched 5/6 of the Star Wars movies, so I think I'm definitely qualified.
I've watched them all, and I've always been like, okay.
Which one have you not watched, Dan?
The third one.
The third of the original trilogy? Or?
Oh, no, I've seen the original trilogy a lot.
Okay.
Like the last one that has come out.
Because
I was so burnt out, like, after the first two, I was just like,
that was actually the better of those three too.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Especially the last half of it. It was actually that was the last. You know what? Honestly, like the whole like prequel trilogy was like essentially like half of a good movie stretched out to 3 movies.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Anyway, there's all of our Star Wars biases and non-biases. Our Star Wars nerd. Who wants to start? Steve, why don't you start?
Yeah. So I am at least a bit of a Star Wars nerd. Certainly a Star Wars fan. But obviously, I don't like the prequels.
You're a Star Wars nerd as well.
I am a Star Wars fan and a huge nerd. That's certainly true. And there's actually like my old general manager years ago definitely qualifies as this guy. He's a Star Wars nerd, and that's about it. I remember like showing him my copy of the old like I forget what their new latest revision was, Wizards of the Coast, but probably the second iteration of their Star Wars rules.
Oh, the D21.
Yeah. Those things are at least pretty. So like you could play one of these games and then show them pretty pictures.
The Fantasy Flight ones are gorgeous, but yeah.
But yeah, I haven't played the Wizards of the Coast game or the Fantasy Flight games, but I've avoided them. Anyway, whatever. Mine's still a little on the nose in that it's a Star Wars specific hack of Apocalypse World called Star Wars World, and it's by Andrew Medeiros of Urban Shadows fame. I think I've mentioned it before.
Oh, actually. Yeah. Well, have you? I don't know.
I think maybe on our second episode, or when we were talking about.
Continuing on.
So I've run it twice, And it's a more or less standard Apocalypse World hack in that it doesn't go really far afield like some of the stuff you'll find in like Swords Without Master or whatever. It's, you know, you have playbooks and you roll 2 dice and you add your stat, and yeah, it's what you'd expect if you're familiar with Apocalypse World.
Right, yeah.
But the way that those rules function makes it great for Star Wars-y adventure. I've run it twice. It's gone spectacularly both times. And there's all sorts of, you know, crazy, high-flying, pulpy space fantasy action in both of them. You know, chases across rooftops and lightsabers and explosions and bounty hunters and whatnot. And the most recent iteration of the rules, he's been updating them periodically for at least a few years, is especially well done, and he's thankfully tweaked a few more of the rules. I think removed the equivalent of the Apocalypse World's Go Aggro. So he's removed the equivalent of give me something or I'll shoot you, which is nice because it's not quite as Star Wars appropriate. Yeah. And it has, I think Star Wars World might be, it's at least the first iteration of an Apocalypse World hack that I'm aware of that has death moves. So I believe it had them before the...
Okay, yeah.
What's the Grim World?
Oh, right? Yeah, Grim World. Yeah, Grim World. Yeah.
But there might be something else I'm unaware of. But anyway, it has... and death moves, once you, like, read through the playbooks, suddenly become very appropriate. Like, if you're a Force user, you're probably going to become a Force Spirit or something like that. At which point, once you've switched over playbooks, that character's dead now. But you can bring back that character in an appropriate scene
I see.
To give
kind of cool.
sage advice.
Yeah.
And if you're the ace, if you're the hotshot pilot, then I think you can pick somebody from the remaining PCs to be like your inheritor. And then you will your ship to them. Oh no, I think maybe the ace does. It's the equivalent of one, you know, they go out with a bang or something like that. But some sort of pilot, they will their ship to someone else.
Oh, okay, that's cool.
And that they get a bonus when they fly or something like that. Those are really well done. And they also have, the game started off, early iterations actually had sex moves, more or less, or the, you know, Apocalypse World special moves. And those are not quite as appropriate.
When you have sex with your sister.
It's a little on the nose. Medeiros,
that's what she said. Sorry.
Medeiros switched that to when you have an intimate moment with something or something like that.
I think this whole segment, this whole brand new segment, the answer will always be just find appropriate Apocalypse World hack.
Right. Yeah.
That probably would be half my answers,
Right,
but this one I have experience with and I can vouch for. It's a ton of fun. The one thing I think is missing that I like just sort of hacked into it at the start of the last game I ran is there's no difference between like if you were playing an Ithorian and you're a Mon Calamarian and I'm a human, there's no difference. So what is fun to do is at the start you're like, okay, hello Star Wars nerd whose first time it is. What sort of bonus would you have for being whatever bizarre alien thing I've never heard of?
That's a great way to hook in a Star Wars nerd, isn't it? That's good.
And if you're human, because humans are special or whatever, then it's what planet you're from.
Right. Yeah, because I remember playing that Fantasy Flight Star Wars game, and I was playing it with a group of people who were really into Star Wars, and I'm not. And, like, let me tell you, it was very irritating because half the table was like, oh, well, a Bandalorian wouldn't do that, or, well, a Gregamul would never do that from, you know, it was like, oh, God, I don't even know what the fuck you're talking about. Like, shut the fuck up. Sorry. It's been a very long day. Sorry. So, no, that's cool. Hey, earlier, you said it almost so fast. Did you say that you thought Swords Without Master was derived from Apocalypse World? Did you say that?
Oh, did I say Swords? I meant Worlds Without Master.
Oh, Worlds.
They have a number of games.
Got
that
it.
Are,
okay. Yeah, you said Swords Without Master, and I was like, whoa, that is
very possible. Okay. Not the first time.
So what was the Worlds Without Master thing? What was that?
Epidai Ravishal is Wolf Spell.
Oh, that's right. Wolf Spell is Apocalypse World,
and I think Return of the Avenger.
Okay.
Or whatever that one's called.
No, I don't think that one is.
I could be wrong.
Yeah, I guess a lot of them are kind of.
It's like
AW inspired, but very like
right.
Loose, yeah. Cool. Dan, what is your game that is going to hook the Star Wars nerd into role-playing games?
All right, let me walk you down the path of choosing this game that I'm about to drop on you, because it's not even the one listed on the sheet. I'm calling it audible.
Oh, shit.
We're doing it live. Initially, I was like, well, I'll just talk about Lady Blackbird, because that's basically the plot of the first Star Wars movie, right? Like, you got your princess who's been captured by the Imperials or whatever, and you have to get her away, and you have a monstrous, like, co-pilot guy and all of this. I mean, it's basically Star Wars. We've talked about that a lot, though, so just file that one away. That could be a good one. My second idea was, I'm just going to pretend that I don't know the difference between Star Wars and Star Trek, and recommend like Lasers and Feelings or Far Trek or something that is like
Far Trek, really?
I don't know. It's one of the various like Star Trek things I've played.
No, we've played it together. I think
it was fine.
Yeah,
I thought about going that route and just seeing how long you guys would let me go before one of you corrected me.
Under on 5 seconds, probably.
Yeah, I know. So that's why I figured like that would be a very short joke, and so it probably wouldn't have been worth it. So
right. I'm glad you explained the joke though. In the detail that you just did. That's
right.
Good.
Well, I wanted you to appreciate it.
I do.
I feel a keen academic appreciation of that joke.
Exactly. That's what I strive for with my comedy. So then I was going to do Misspent Youth, which is what I actually wrote down on the sheet, because it does tell the story of like young upstarts trying to overthrow the authority, like trying to take down the man. And bonus, all of the examples in the book are literally Star Wars.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. So I kind of got stuck on that. But now that you've mentioned Worlds Without Master, I think I'm going to go with Invisible Empire, because I think you could have Invisible Empire where Jabba the Hutt is the immortal emperor, and because the whole idea behind Invisible Empire is
it works. I'm totally
you alternate
feeling you on
between
this.
like, what is it? Awe and dread, right? And so you've got like awe where everything's frantic and like the little alien band is playing and like everyone's all happy and like the little aliens are jumping around making their stupid alien noises. Like that would be the big extended scene that he added in. Like, the stupid alien with the big lips on the end of her snout singing a ridiculous song. And then like dread after he like yanks the slave girl into the pit and everybody right?
Yeah,
and so like
I'm feeling
I think that would actually work pretty well with like you're just taking turns and you introduce a guy from the Star Wars universe who has some business with Jabba, and he comes up and approaches the throne, and you describe how you like relate your tale or present your gifts to
This is
Jabba.
good.
That sounds great.
Watching and listening to you unspool this right now, Dan, is like it's like watching jazz. I'm loving
this is my process.
I'm loving
I'm
this.
just
It's
like,
so good. I'm loving it.
I'm not even going to write anything down in the future ever.
Don't just freestyle.
Podcasting.
Freestyle it. Yep.
And so, yeah, I mean, that's basically it, right? They get the chance to like bring in whatever obscure, crazy Star Wars characters they can think of and like drop them in front of Jabba the Hutt. And who doesn't love Jabba the Hutt? And then then if things go badly, they can describe how Jabba murders them.
Yep.
Right.
So
it's kind of perfect.
And
it really is.
Even better than a silent emperor, you have Jabba. So every once in a while, you'll get to say, "Ki Jabba no wonky," or whatever. As you get somebody to drop you into a pit. Yeah, it sounds like tons of fun.
I love it. That's
so
great.
I think I solved it.
I think you solved it. That's pretty good. I will still offer mine, even though the problem is clearly solved. I'm going to say that, now this might be an odd choice. I'm going to say My Life with Master as being the first role-playing game you introduce to a person who has never played role-playing games. My Life with Master. But
it didn't really strike me how, like, potentially fraught with danger that might
it could be completely fraught with danger, except you give it a twist. And the twist is you don't do My Life with Master with the classic 1920s movie monster Igor, Dr. Frankenstein setup, right? Instead, you do My Life with Master with a Sith Lord as the master, and all of the minions are the Sith Lord's minions going about doing his evil work, but some of them might run into people in the galaxy who change them from their evil ways and convince them to go to a new route and then fight back against the Sith Lord. And because I'm very, very good at Star Wars lore and I know precisely because I know precisely how it all works, it's just like the movies. Like, doesn't he have like multiple little Sith minions that like he's going to pick the best one to be the second Sith minion? Isn't that how it goes?
That must have been in the third movie that I did not watch.
Was. I'm pretty sure it was. So like you've got Darth Sidious, and then all the like, you know, America's next top Sith Lord contestants ready to try to, you know, it could be something like that. I don't know how Star Wars works. I don't know how the Sith works, but I think you could do like a cool like Sith Lord and his intergalactic minions, you know, and he's sending them out to do things like to destroy worlds or to do this or that, and they may not want to do it. but they can't resist the mastered, so they have to go
Right.
do it. And I think it would work. You'd have to fiddle with the names of the stats and stuff. Like self-loathing may not work so well, or maybe it does.
I don't know. I mean, I think
yeah.
Darth Vader could be described as pretty
self-loathing. That's true. Yeah.
So an asterisk on this, because that sounds like something we could have a lot of fun with, because we don't really give a shit about the Star Wars one.
I think so too.
But if you're going for this dude, I might want to double check that Siths do have multiple minions, because you remember the Yoda, always two there are, or whatever.
Oh, well, no, I think, I think I've mentioned this idea to Farrell once, and I think Farrell is into the extended universe, which I know is not a part of it anymore, but
that's been struck from the record.
But I think there was like a thing where that was the way it was at one time, so maybe like this is a sort of historical Sith thing that you do, and then you're going to really hook the Star Wars nerd, right?
Right.
Because they're into that obscure go shoot yourself bullshit, right? So I think I've hit on something here. I don't know. I think we both have, Dan. You too, person who just chose a Star Wars game. You've also hit on something as well.
I've played
Star
it.
Wars,
so fun.
Star Wars and Apocalypse World. Wow, way to grab the low hanging fruit on that one, Steve. Jesus Christ!
If I hadn't played it, come on.
Awesome. Next segment. So our next segment is called Community Feedback. We used to call this listener feedback, but I think that's too narrow. And I think we're a whole community, not just people who listen to the podcast. There's lots of us who do different things. I don't know.
Who are you talking to right now?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I've got this like really intense self-consciousness about new things on the podcast. Like I feel like I have to over-explain it. I don't know. It's weird. So this has been a really, really fun recording session. I've enjoyed this so much, you guys. It's been so great. Let's do politics now. That'd be awesome.
Yay. A perfect cap to our podcast.
A perfect capstone to this. So I don't know, like a week ago on G+, I posted as sort of like a little, I don't know, it was not a rant. It was just more of a an observation that I felt like sometimes in games, like there are a few players who I've encountered where in recent times where they feel uncomfortable playing women characters, or they feel uncomfortable playing gay characters. Like these are straight males who feel uncomfortable playing women or gay characters. And it sparked a lot of really interesting discussion on the G+ post. All of it incredibly civil and incredibly not like everything else on the internet in terms of discussion. Like it was really, really terrific and life affirming even. And I enjoyed it a lot. And so I wanted to share some of the feedback that two of the people hit on, because they were kind of different, but both equally valid. And so listener Daniel had this to say. Speaking for myself, and this is going to be a little hard for me because this is riddled with spelling mistakes. I mean, fucking loaded up with spelling mistakes.
Daniel,
listener Daniel.
I can't believe how many underlined words
Jesus
there are in her little document here.
I know. It's just like a big... Okay. Anyway. So, listeners, Daniel's one of our best friends. We're in the group. We're not
just being assholes.
We're not just being assholes. All right. Speaking for myself, listener Daniel says, RPing a gay guy does cause me a little bit of discomfort. So does RPing a lady or RPing a love scene with another player of either gender or player gender, regardless of character gender. I may just be a prude at heart. This does make certain games like The Final Girl a bit of a difficult thing for me. I don't mean to judge anyone. I mean no offense, but I sometimes hesitate to play those characters because I know I will hesitate and resist the story when people look to me for intimate moments. I remember another game where you and I, when he says you, he means me, where you and I were playing a barbarian and a wizard, and you suddenly decided that the characters should be lovers. You then went into this amazing detail. I thought this was hilarious. It's so funny. Probably one of the funniest things I've ever heard.
Some of that seems added. I don't see that in the
but I didn't
here.
know what to do other than laugh very, very hard, harder than I've ever laughed.
Again, there's some additions to that sentence.
When I start a character, how can you even read from all the way over there? You're not supposed to know.
I got new context.
Okay. When I start a character, it's a good assumption that it will be a man. If sex comes up, my default character choice is a straight man. I am not fundamentally opposed to changing these things, but it will slow me down, and I'm likely to hold back or forget about it later. I also generally play nice/good characters, but whenever I try to be an evil jerk, I generally realize how much further everyone else is going, and I become the straight man again. And he also kind of like credits that to him being an engineer as well for some reason.
I think he was saying he also always plays engineers.
Oh, that's I misinterpreted that.
Which is true.
Yeah, he also says he also plays engineers. That is true. Yeah. So I like games where other people make declarations about your character. That's when the fun happens. It's just certain kinds of fun are harder for me to deliver. He says, and this is I skipped a little bit of his post. He says, I think you should mostly play what you're comfortable with, but be ready for some curveballs. It probably should be respected if a player does not say, if a player says, I'm not comfortable with that, let's try another way. It's going to happen, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they are a bad person or that they think less of the other players. So I have some thoughts on that statement. It was very well said, if terribly, terribly spelled. Sorry. And
sorry, Daniel, we love you.
So this is my initial thinking. Do you guys have any initial thoughts before I dive into it? I don't know.
I'll come in.
Okay. Well, so my thinking is, I totally agree that you should respect that you should totally respect people's boundaries and that's okay. I'm a little bothered by, I think there's a tendency in the culture to sort of reduce being gay to just a sex act. Like that kind of bothers me a little bit. Like that's the whole, like, that's what constitutes being gay. And I don't think Daniel meant it to be that way, but I think that like, if you're being asked to play a gay character, you're not necessarily being asked to like have intimate moments with characters who are men. It turns out there's more to being a gay man than just being sexually attracted to gay men. So at least that's what I'm told about other gay men. I don't know. And so I just like naked hairless werewolves personally. So
that's true.
Yeah.
That has been well documented.
Right, yeah, yes. That's what being a gay man's about. This is coming out. Clearly. So anyway, so there's a tendency to do that, I think. And I think that like it is it's maybe a subtle thing, but I think that there's something to be said about trying to play a character who is a different gender or who is who doesn't fit into the box that you fit in, but played in a way that's like not like stereotypical or like reduced to a sex act or whatever, right? Like I think there's something to be said for that. And then also the other thing I would say is I think there's a bit of a time limit on how long this is acceptable resistance, you know? And here's what I mean by that. Like, I think at a certain point, after you've played a certain number of story games, like over the course of months and years, I think at a certain point, like, I think the table should be able to reasonably expect that you are going to participate in the way that the median participant does, you know? Does that make any sense? Like,
yeah, well, like with story games, you're usually playing one shots or, you know, at least shorter runs. And there's a lot more characters to play, and there's a lot, you know, if over the course of a year, I've played, 45 characters and every single one of them is a straight white guy. That is a little weird.
Right. Yeah.
I have much less excuse for that than it's like I sit down for one time and never change, never go into anything else, never try anything else.
Yeah. Yeah.
In other words, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess I think there's something to be said about like, there's a whole like, I mean, oh God, I'm not going to get into like heteronormativity and all that bullshit, but like, I mean, it's not bullshit, it's true, but like, no one bats an eye when I play a straight white guy, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's
right.
not a thing, right? Like, it's just no big deal. And I don't bat an eye either because that's what the culture is organized around, right? Or more or less, right? Like straightness is the default. And so it's just it's a thing. But whereas like anything else is like not the default. And that's the thing that's like right. Unusual and odd. And so I think just maybe I'm just sensitive to it as a gay man, but like I find that a little like not offensive, but just a little bit like, I do you all the time, right? Like I do you all the time. Why could you do me once?
This is what you sound like.
Because I got this sexy werewolf NPC and he's ready to go. So anyway, that's I want to say that. And then but it was very, very well put sentiment. Everyone should go read that. Daniel had a lot of really interesting things to say, and I thought that was really well put, and I appreciate his thoughts on that. As far as the other person goes, who I thought had a different perspective, and also an equally interesting perspective, was listener Colin. I think it's Colin, not Colin. I've heard of. It's always pronounced.
I am sure it's not.
No,
Colin.
No. Colin Powell.
That's it, though.
That's true.
It's
Yeah,
just
but he's the only
Colin
one.
Powell. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Listener Colin says, whether it's a guy uncomfortable playing a girl, or a straight dude weirded out by playing a queer or a white dude, or not wanting and queer. He's using queer in the sense of like the political way that you use queer, not like an asshole calling a gay guy queer.
You queer?
Yeah, not like that. Or a dude weirded out by playing a queer, or a white dude not wanting to play a black person. It is basically a resistance about playing as, quote, the other. I think there is a difference between being uncomfortable playing the other for fear you won't do it right. For example, playing too over the top with stereotypes versus being uncomfortable because of some sort of prejudice / bias / hangups. The former is understandable and even sort of laudable. The latter is sad and disheartening. Neither should be showstoppers, though, and if they are, personally, I think people should get over it. Role-playing is a wonderful and safe way to experience what it is like to be someone not yourself, whether that is a warrior dwarf with a drinking problem. They all have that, by the way. All the warrior dwarves have. They show up everywhere with ale.
That's true.
And they're Scottish.
Boy, isn't that fascinating, Dan?
Oh, I know. What a great story. What a great, unique character that is.
I've lost my place now.
Probably hangs around with an elf who really likes trees.
Whether that is a warrior dwarf with a drinking problem or a black queer librarian. And if you can't get past your hang-ups to even roleplay among friends as the other, then how can you ever hope to understand them as a human being rather than just the other? Also, let's be honest here. Gays, lesbians, this is what I was saying earlier. Gays, lesbians, queers, genderqueers all have tons of experience role-playing cis straight people because they do it all the time just to get by in society. Same goes for a woman role-playing male culture to get by in the workplace, and blacks role-playing as stiff, polite white people. That sounds a little offensive on its own, so as not to get arrested. So if you're a white straight dude, don't you owe it to yourself, if not the world, to at least once try role-playing as someone not your same gender, sexuality, or ethnicity? I thought that was very well put as well. So.
Yeah, I really loved what Colin wrote, and am a big fan of the sentiment therein. I'm not always great about this. I've been trying more recently to be a little more conscious about not just being okay with diversity, but trying to pursue it and trying to, in role playing, incorporate, aspects about people that are not like me. And again, I'm not always great about it, but I'm trying to improve.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah. You know something I do. My default thing when I play a woman character is to make her vampy and sexy. And I find myself, you think, okay,
yeah.
there's head nodding. Dan, a lot of
yeah.
head nodding going on right now. My default is to play them like vampy and sexy. And then while I'm doing it, I'm having fun. But then after I'm done, I feel like a piece of shit because I'm like, you know what? I could not have played that character in a more offensive manner, basically. And
you could have.
Well, I probably could have, but and I think that's, I think everyone falls into these traps, right? Like, I think it's possible. And that kind of gets to what Colin was saying. And I think even that listener Daniel was alluding to, this idea of like, you don't want to be you don't want to do it wrong or whatever,
Yeah.
Now in my defense, and I'm happy to raise a defense for myself.
How noble of you.
I know, yeah, white animus, I know. I would like to say that often I also play, I often like to introduce elements of camp, and I view certain characterizations and campy characterizations as valuable. I like that. And so, because my perspective is camp a lot of the times, like that's kind of what I bring to the table a lot of the time. And so I'm not necessarily like playing that vampy woman character in this context where she's like sticking out like a sore thumb, right? Like there's often like a little bit of like camp context to go with it. So,
also playing that character gives you an excuse to make the hand motions that you like so much.
Is that a thing I do?
But because it gives you an excuse to, play with hair you don't have.
Oh, I do. Yeah, I do.
Long
that.
hair.
Yeah. That is a thing I like to do. So,
which is fun.
Cool. Dan, do you have any thoughts on any of this?
I think that I'm, again, like, probably in about the same position as Steve, in that, like, I don't know, I do default to playing like a straight white dude most of the time. Like, if I consciously decide not to, then I will. But like, in a lot of cases, I think it depends on the game, because if you're talking about something like Monster Hearts or something like that, where like your character and their relationships and their sexuality and all of that is actually like the focus of the story, then I think that's great. And I like love going into that. Right. Mm-hmm. And that's awesome. But like, in a lot of cases, if the game doesn't focus on things like that, like if sexuality or gender or something isn't a focus of the game, then a lot of times I do default to like a generic white dude, because I don't know, I feel like there is sort of a hesitation of like, well, I don't want to like be super offensive. And like, in a lot of cases, like, I think that I probably play those characters like a straight white dude pretending to be one of those characters, right?
Yeah.
Like, when we played, what was the game we played about the queer enclave at the end of the apocalypse?
I was just thinking of it, Dream Askew.
Dream Askew, right. And the story we told, like, presumably we were all like, queer women or something, right?
We were just members of a queer enclave, queer being a wide spectrum of like different gender identities and the things. So,
right. And that's great. And nobody had a problem with it. But the story we told, we could have all been straight white dudes and told the exact same story. And so I think like in a lot of cases, if it isn't going to add something to the story, then I don't feel compelled to do it. And, you know, maybe, I don't know, maybe I should, but.
Yeah, I think Dream Askew is an interesting case because I had a problem with that game because Dream Askew was the classic, to me, a very classic example of the game designer, Avery McDonald in this case. The game designer has clearly played this with her friends. And, and there's like a certain, they all have some kind of like shared language or shared experience or something like that, like that allows them to understand, that allows them to fill in the gaps, right? I found Dream Askew very hard to play because even though I've been involved in like LGBT activism, and even though I consider myself fairly well read and thoughtful, for the most part, I had a hard time like, you know, really, really like grokking that game because I felt like the game didn't give me enough to hang my hat on, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Does that make sense?
Exactly.
Like
so like trying
neither in the mechanics nor in the setup material.
Right. And in some cases it feels like you're like shoehorning things in and you're making a big deal out of this.
Right.
Like when the story doesn't necessarily demand it. Like, and that's and like you kind of feel compelled, at least I feel compelled in some cases to like try and shoehorn in like, well, I'm a black guy in this, so I should really shoehorn that in there because I made the effort to do this.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of, well, you know, honestly, like I'm in some ways like, you know, I've made my purple pansexual kitsune argument, which is, you know, don't make your character the purple pansexual kitsune unless you're willing to like show us that and role play it.
Right. Yeah.
Whereas I guess what I probably should say is, you know, you just, this is our world and you just happen to be a purple pansexual kitsune, you know? Like, you know, like, I think maybe that's the way we're supposed to, like, what is the right, like, frame of reference here, right? For, like, and what is role playing? I don't know. I feel like this is a bigger topic suddenly. It's blowing up to more than I thought it was going to. But like, you know, if I choose to be a queer character, do I, you know, in a setting that is not Dream Askew, it's just some other sort of game setting, do I have an obligation to like emphasize that in my role play, or is it just, or do I just happen to be a queer character? Like, because I feel like there's two competing interests there, right?
Right. And so that's why I feel like in a lot of cases it's easier to just play to yourself.
Default. Yeah. Right? Yeah. To default. Yeah.
I've found myself whenever I end up playing either a gay character or a bisexual character, I seem to make the decision not like when I'm creating the character, but sort of in the moment. Like if it's a story game and there was a Monster Hearts game and I, because of a move on my sheet, I knew I wanted to blackmail my teacher.
Right.
But I didn't know what I wanted to blackmail him to do. And I'm like, oh, I want to blackmail him to pathetically hang out with me. And, you know, maybe he'll make a move.
Yeah.
You know, so I just sort of, I guess I'm bisexual now.
Yeah. And I do that too. And I feel like that's where like, I'm okay doing that, but I feel a little more awkward just stating at the outset, like, this is who my character is, right? Like, my character is gay. Like, I feel a little more awkward doing that if it doesn't necessarily, like, flow from the plot or even, like, the setup of Fiasco or something like that.
Yeah.
Like, if it makes sense that that's who my character is, then I'm great with that.
Well, the counter argument to that, though, right, is what I've just said earlier, which is, like, you should be able just to make that decision that, like, okay, my character is gay because that's perfectly normal and not othered, right? Like, I think I think there's
I understand the argument.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Like, it's perfectly valid.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's definitely like there are two tensions, and I think it's heightened in a role playing game of, you know, do I go out of my way to play this queer character, like to really emphasize it, you know, or do I like do my best to try to make it seem like I'm just another person in this setting and no different from anyone else, right? Like that's a tension, and I think role playing games are a safe place to explore it, and that's great. Well, so anyway, that was terrific. I want to cut it short before we go too deep in it. Thank you so much, listeners, Daniel and Colin, for inspiring that conversation. You guys are both awesome. All right, and that's our podcast. So if you'd like to get in touch with us, you should join our Google Plus community. You can go to the Google Plus communities section, type in the gauntlet, and it will appear on your screen
by magic
with a link for you to click on and join. And if you And if you want to email us, you're fucked because I'm not going to tell you the email address. And then I don't know what else I'm supposed to say here. We're going to have a gap, right?
No podcast next week.
No podcast next week. Yeah. So it'll be the Friday after next, or I don't know, whatever. There'll be a gap. So this is a really, really good session. Thank you so much, Steve.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.
Thank you, listeners.